as you guys see here, this is the state grant funding formula, zero-based budgeting funding formula. And I really don't like calling it that. And many of you may not know why we call it that. And if I could see you and I could get a show of hands, I would get people to raise their hand if they knew what the name of the last funding formula was. But Susan Roberts actually named the last one a New Direction funding formula. And it was because the state auditor had come in and asked us to do several things, and we were moving in a new direction. And the reason why we call this the zero-based budgeting funding formula is because the governor at the time, and I can't remember, I think it was Governor Dill, decided that we were going to do zero-based budgeting. And so Jason Matt worked for OPB back then, and he worked really closely with me and Julie, and Steve Schaefer was a lot of help on this funding formula. And you all were a lot of help if you were here then. For the new folks that don't know, it was a lot of work. It's funny, Wendy wanted me to just make sure everybody knows that we're not changing funding formulas. That's not the reason we're doing this. And I have to just underline and say, yes, we are not changing funding formulas. I know Julie wants to finish up her tenure, and we hope she stays at least, I think, 13 more years. That's as long as I have. But we do not want to change funding formulas, so nobody worry about that. But today we're going to go over the reasons for the change, some basic expectations of this funding formula, some components and calculations, and then flexibility and responsibility and how those two kind of feed into each other. So yeah, we had budget cuts from 2008 to 2013. I started at the very end of fiscal year 2000. I think it was 7, but it might have been 8. But like I had to cut $100,000 out of the budget my first month there, and I was scared to death. And sometimes I look at my old Facebook statuses, and sometimes I overshare, as many of you know. And one of my status is, I wonder if I'm cutting myself out of a job today. And so as the years went on, the governor's office really asked us to look at our priorities and our strategies and to cut things based on that. But Lamar Veach, who was the state librarian then, he was really like, wanted it to be in your hands. And so we let people just cut their part of the pie, whichever they wanted to. And it was a big mess. Like if you go back and look at my spreadsheets, like they're color coded crazy messes. I open them on occasion, looking at past things. And I think, wow, how did we even deal with this? It wasn't sustainable anymore doing that. But the other part, to me, the part that really mattered was communicating our story became difficult. And that's so important to what we do, is communicating our story. And so we had meetings. The very first meeting, I think, was like my second month here. It was in Covington. And I'm going to make a joke, and hopefully this won't scare anybody too bad. But we had this big board where people put sticky notes up of all the things, all the ways they would cut funding. And I remember, I won't say who, this director has lovingly retired, but they wrote, "Do away with GPLS." And I was like, oh my goodness, where did I come to work? But it was a lot of fun. And immediately I loved the passion of this group of individuals. And so it was kind of baptism by fire. But anyways, we got to the zero-based budgeting formula. We had lots of different tries. And this one is beautiful. I tell Julie that all the time. This is a beautiful funding formula. I think it works perfectly. It's not always easy to explain, especially the SSG portion of the salary thing and how we get those numbers. But it's just, I think it's a great funding formula. I'm so proud of the work we did on it. Our basic expectations, we wanted to be as equitable as we could for all the public libraries. And we did have a lot of the very small libraries were getting 2 professional positions, and we just couldn't justify continuing to do that. We just didn't have the money to do that. So that was something that was a hard decision that we had to make, but we really, really did try to make things as equitable as possible. Of course, we wanted to provide qualified professionals in the library systems. And that's, to me, our assets, our biggest assets are still our professionals. And by our professionals, I mean our MLISs, our CPAs, our engineers, our IT engineers. We have lots of professionals that run the library. And also our paraprofessionals are amazing. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be able to do everything we do. But we really, really decided that the most important part of the funding formula was to provide qualified professionals in every library system in Georgia. And I think that's still one of the most beautiful things that we have that a lot of states don't have, is that every time I go anywhere and I talk about what we do, I always am proud to say we have an MLIS in every single library system in our state. And I think that's an amazing thing. Another thing we wanted to do with this funding formula was to put the library management in charge. The old funding formula, like GPLS had all these set of rules, and we sent you exactly this amount of money and you had to exactly do this with it. And it may still feel like it's like that, but trust me, we increased the flexibility like you just can't even imagine. So when I reviewed this yesterday, and I was like, I hadn't put the implemented in 2016 because I get asked that occasionally by Julie or Wendy or Ben or Pat, or maybe even Deborah Hakes, like, when did we implement the current funding formula? And I'm always like, I don't know. I'll have to go back and look. So I thought it would be great to put that in the slide presentation. So 2016, we're in fiscal year 2022, I believe. That means we've been doing this funding formula for 6 years. I've been here 13 years. So we've been doing this funding formula almost as long as the other one. So I wonder, Wendy makes fun of me for calling it the new funding formula. I wonder how much longer we'll call it the new funding formula and just start calling it the funding formula. One of the main things we wanted to do with this is not require conversion. So the old funding formula, even before those big budget cuts, it was already unsustainable. And so some people who had earned positions were forced to convert them for SSG. And we wanted to get rid of any, we give you this, but then we change it to this. Another thing we did is to get more than 4 positions, you had to have at least a population of 75,000, because it didn't make sense to us if there was a system that had 10 counties, but only 10,000 in population, that they would be getting 10 professional positions. And once again, that was just going back to try to make this equitable. And anybody who knows, like, trying to make things equitable it's probably a losing battle, but we worked really hard at doing the best that we could. And I'm proud of what we came up with. And then of course, a cap of 15 positions for any system. And I'm not sure if we're there yet. I know that Atlanta Fulton is getting really close to that, but that's the most positions that any system will have from us. These are just some of the basic rules of the state reimbursed positions. And as I mentioned, if you came in a little late, I don't want to do a deep dive into the salary grant, because we are going to have another mini webinar just on that. But the rule is that you get 1 per county, except per the rules in the prior slide. You get 1 per 75,000 in population per the prior slide. And then it's the position is calculated annually, and it just depends on TRS is going to be funded, the healthcare is going to be funded, and those amounts sometimes change every year, and so that sometimes changes the salary. Sometimes we get a 2% raise included. I don't think we've gotten that in a few years. And something to mention here that I don't think that we included, that I included in this presentation, and we will talk a lot more about that in the salary presentation, is that in the past, if you weren't on TRS or you weren't on state health benefit plan, you didn't get any money for that. And we did add into this current funding formula that you get the same amounts no matter what retirement and healthcare plan you are. And once again, that was the work Julie and I did, trying to work really hard to make sure this funding formula was equitable. The system services grant. And so that's the interesting one there. I'm not going to read through this whole slide, but this is one of the slides that I put full information on. So if you have any questions, it really explains it. And I took this directly from our guidelines, but it's basically whatever amount of 75,000 that you don't get that position. So let's say you're at 74,000, so you don't get a position. In the old funding formula, you just would get nothing. So in this funding formula, you get that 74,000 divided by 75,000, and then that percentage of the base allocation. The difference is once you get to that 75,000, you get that base allocation plus the benefits. And that is something that's a little confusing. And that is something that I'll try to explain more when we get to the presentation, the next presentation on the salaries. This is interesting because this is something that I think we've been trying to learn together. And so I really was excited to be able to put this in this presentation. SSG funds can be used for almost anything. And if you have any questions about what you should or shouldn't use them for, and of course, you can't buy booze or tobacco or gift cards with your SSG. You can't lobby and those sorts of things, but you can use almost any like governmental expenditure. The last 2 points are the points that I think that are so important, and I added as well as the annual report on here today because I think sometimes some of the business folks especially think that I might have a different perception on how I want something recorded as Whitney, but she and I are a team, and we really want you recording the things that you record for me on my budget sheet the same way you record them on the annual report. So if you use SSG as salaries, that's how it needs to be recorded. If you use SSG as materials, and this is the newer one, we've just really kind of started this in the last couple of years, and I know some people are doing really great with this. Some people are just getting on board with it, and I'm trying to be patient. And the most important part about this is to me, and this is something that also I discussed with Julie. She probably doesn't remember because I'm telling you that woman, she does so many things. I just can't even imagine how she keeps up with it all. But we really want to be able to tell our story. And so if you're using your SSG for salaries or you're using it as materials, we want to just be able to tell the General Assembly exactly that story that we're doing. And we want to make it to be clear and precise. And that's the reason we want to do that. The materials grant, the materials grant is not really part of the funding formula, but it has become something that we've been getting every year, and it's increasing. And I want to just say thank you to everyone who has worked so hard out there to get Julie, of course, but I know Jimmy Bass and Beth McIntyre and a lot of the others on the council have worked so hard to get those monies increased. If you ever have a question about, is this an allowable expense or is this not allowable expense, just email me and let me know. Sometimes I have to email Julie and say, hey, what do you think? But as long as it's in the general mission of the material grant, we're usually okay with it. So the hardest thing about this, and I love how I've got flexibility and responsibility, because I've had conversations with several business managers and several directors that say, I feel like you give more rules, more regulations every single year. And so in the past, we told you exactly what to pay everybody. There wasn't this range that there is now. I said, you can pay this person this is what you can pay them. You don't have any, we had library directors that were making less than reference librarians. So it was very complicated. And so I think it was great that we added this flexibility. We also added the allied professionals. So if you wanted to hire a CPA or an IT person, you could pay them with this money without them having the MLIS. But also it requires you and your business manager mainly to keep up and track all that. And that's why we have that online budget sheet. For those of you who think the online budget sheet is difficult, the first couple years we did this as a spreadsheet. And I promise you, this online budget sheet is a million times better. Jessica Everingham's not here, but she was the assistant state librarian at the time that I came up with the budget website, and it was actually her idea. And I tell her that that's a lasting impression that she left at GPLS, and it's a wonderful thing. So I love having that. Something else that is really great about this funding formula, in the past, if you had a vacancy, you just didn't get paid for it. You just lost that money. And now a vacancy doesn't equal automatic loss of funds. If you have a vacancy for up to 6 months, even now at the beginning of the year, for 6 months, you can use that as SSG. After that, you will lose the funds. And the reason why is because it's back to the funding formula. Really, 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 the main purpose was to fund professional positions. And like I just said, the flexibility does create more responsibility. We're getting near the end of our conversation, and this is just from the website, but anything you need to ask about the website, almost everything is on the Library Finance webpage. And I did rebrand. If you see the link, it says State Grants Accounting. I rebranded it to Finance because a lot of times accounting is more just debits and credits, and finance to me is budgeting and accounting. And sometimes a lot of your business managers even do HR. And so library finance is just more encompassing. And I think it's important to recognize all that the professionals are doing. But there's so much information on that page. I invite you to check it out sometime.